Welcome to a brief seminar on project management for artists and designers. In this seminar, we'll cover the basics of project management and discuss how it might pertain to a common project, the exhibition or trade show. I'm your host, John Deal. It can seem an awkward fit to try and map artists' or designers' practices to a project management platform. However, doing so can provide a keen insight into the type of practice that they might already be pursuing. It can illuminate any unseen gaps and indicate what types of tools or processes could help them improve or streamline their practice. This graffiti found in a washroom stall at OCAD-U in Toronto, Canada reads, "There are issues with teaching art in general. Example, they have us learn about master artists who took years to complete the painting and I get 2 weeks? Come on, son." Which is followed by, "Or they're trying to teach you project management." This exchange is interesting to me because project management would actually address the first person's issues by teaching some time management techniques. Furthermore, if time is an issue, then adjusting some of the other factors would help to manage the workload more effectively, i.e., it doesn't have to be a masterwork. Projects are defined as having a clear beginning and end, having a defined group of stakeholders, requiring a defined set of resources, and they must add value to the organization. Shown here is what is referred to as the iron triangle. Each of these items affects the others. Increasing scope will directly increase costs and how long the project will take. If all of these factors are initially optimized to deliver an expected quality, any compromise will ultimately and negatively affect that quality. Projects for artists do not often have a clear beginning, and one could argue that they don't necessarily end clearly either, but rather evolve into new projects in an organic manner. This is one of the main differentiators when adapting the existing model to less rigid practices. Let's look at the main factors. Scope refers to all of the tasks and deliverables that are required by the project to meet its completion. This is a crucial component to pay close attention to. New elements can easily get added, which will lead to scope creep. This can cause delays, increase costs, and ultimately impact the entire project in a negative way. We know what cost and time refers to. All of these factors affect the quality of the service or product. Exhibitions, trade shows, customer orders, music videos, 3D models, and on and on. There are many examples of projects that makers take on during their careers. These are just a sample of what I could think of off the top of my head. What kinds of projects do you work on in your practice? These are the typical stages of a project, sometimes referred to by the acronym IPACAC. Initiating, planning, executing, controlling and monitoring, and finally, closing. In the initiation phase, we'll ask what is driving the project, what problems you're addressing, and/or are you looking for general improvements. With planning, we want to identify who is involved, what resources you'll need, and then establish a timeline from there. We'll activate that timeline in our execution phase and engage the resources to convert them into planned outputs. Controlling and monitoring is largely about mitigating any risks and addressing any challenges in the execution phase. These two phases cycle for a few periods until the project is mostly complete. In the final closing phase, we'll gather our findings, compile a report to highlight any lessons learned, key takeaways, and reconcile any outstanding accounts. Later in our seminar, we'll address some of the adaptations with regard to the iterability and innovation that occurs during the execution phase of the project. Why do you want to take on this project? What is your motivation? What issues, needs, or concerns are you hoping to address through this project? The initiation phase is the point at which we try to clearly articulate the why of the project. We'll get to the how in the planning phase. It's crucial to describe your project. Use simple terms. The 6 pillars outlined here will help to guide you. In addition to describing the expected outcome as a whole, you'll need to identify the materials, tools, and space needed to support the work. This will help to estimate a budget and outline any expenses that need to be controlled. Then name any stakeholders, internal and external, that may have an impact or be impacted by the project. And finally, expose any potential risks that threaten the project. This is meant as a high-level map to help align the elements, keep you on track, and also help you communicate different aspects outwards to potential or existing stakeholders or investors. Okay, so this might be going too far for some, but I wanted to at least mention it. A project charter stems from the last step, defining the project. On this document, you would more formally write out the specific elements of the project. This acts as an abstract that can easily be referred to by anyone and easily shared. You can name it if you want, list any sponsors and a start and end date, add a background, goals, deliverables, scope, and a success criteria. If the subheadings don't quite make sense, you can alter them to better suit. But try to keep the main gist of it. In project management, there's a thing called a workback schedule, or WBS. This is where you begin to schedule in your tasks and jobs from the end date or deadline to calculate your earliest and latest start. When scheduling your required resources, keep in mind that most services will have a duration, and most materials will have some lead time. You'll need to account for this in your timeline planning. If you can estimate the durations for each job in the project, this will also let you know what kind of slack you might have. As well, if there is a series of jobs that have little or no slack, this will help to identify what is referred to as the critical path. If you don't have a deadline, you can choose to set one arbitrarily, or you can just build your plan out from the beginning. When planning your project, it's important to estimate the kinds of risks you might encounter. Consider who is involved. How familiar are you with them, with their work? If there is conflict, do you have an alternative or substitution? Who could negatively be affected by this project? Try to think of all the potential risks and then grade them in terms of how likely or not they are and what the impact could be on your project. If a risk is likely and will have a high impact, it's crucial that you develop a mitigation strategy for this. In order to build a good timeline, it's important to know what resources your project requires, both products and services. You'll need to know how long these services will take. If you have to purchase special materials, you'll need to know if there is any lead time required. Combined, this will tell you the duration of those tasks. This is what is referred to as resource planning. Depending on what type of project you're planning, you might also need to consider spoilage. Say you're planning an event and you want some crudités or a charcuterie board. Place that purchase closer to the event go live to prevent spoilage. Often I'll advise people to source more than one service provider, both for security and for price comparison. Sometimes contractors can be unreliable or may not have exactly that. Oh shit. What I meant to say was that sometimes contractors can be unreliable or may not have exactly the skills that fit your project. If a conflict occurs, this will give you a safety net and help to minimize any interruption to the project continuity. Additionally, you might look into materials that can be substituted in the event that your original materials are in scarce supply or become difficult to acquire. There's an old saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. It's a bit dated, but truth. I've personally witnessed several events and projects go off the rails because the owners didn't plan adequately. A good event planner starts planning months, sometimes years in advance. One of the crucial things to note about a project is that it's easiest to change or cancel jobs and tasks early. The farther along you get into the project, the harder and the more costly it becomes. I never like to issue a change order. It always feels like a little failure. Spend more time in this phase than you think you need to, and ensure that you have best captured all of the particulars. The better your plan, the better your results. Another mechanism that can be used is phase gate or stage gate planning. While this level of rigidity might be undesirable to some, for others it could be a perfect way to keep them organized and dedicated to the work. Basically, at each stage in the project, criteria either must or should be met in order to move into the next phase. It is up to the maker to define the criteria, but in principle, they must be easy to use, relevant and/or realistic, and should allow the user to discriminate between excellent, good, or mediocre performance. Large organizations use this to maintain the integrity of the innovation phases. The rigidity of the system may stifle creativity somewhat, but it ensures accountability. In the traditional model of this, a project may be killed along the way if an oversight committee determines that it doesn't meet the criteria. For artists and designers, I think it's important to tweak the phases slightly and build in some flexibility. With makers, work that doesn't fit the project may be recycled and converted into a new project altogether. In this situation, it's unlikely that there will be an oversight committee, so the maker is the prime, if not the only owner of the process. This means that they'll need to be diligent in their exercise of the phase gate process. This will ultimately serve the primary goals of project management to maintain control over spending, schedule, scope, and ultimately quality. Often, when someone comes to me for advice when they are stuck and their project is simply not progressing, i.e., they are not meeting their criteria, my advice is to go and make some awful work. My rationale here is that through the act of not meeting your criteria, you better define that criteria and can map a pathway to success through failure. Let's start looking at a real-world example of a project, an artist's exhibition. There are some assumptions made up front with this scenario. 1, new work will be created for the exhibition. 2, the artist does not already have materials in stock. And 3, this is a solo exhibition. We start with the exhibition being confirmed by the gallery and carry through the different timeline milestones until the sales from the exhibition are delivered. The main stakeholders for this project are the artist, the gallerist, and the audience and/or collectors. Secondary stakeholders might include the resource or service providers such as framers or shippers, columnists or podcasters, etc. I've also used an arbitrary period for production. For many, a 2-month period wouldn't be enough time. Often exhibitions are planned far in advance to provide ample time for creation, and commonly, some existing work would be included in the exhibition to reduce the workload for the artist. Resource planning is a crucial stage in the project. The materials that you select will affect the products you create. The medium shapes the message. That's why it's important to investigate, study, and test different materials. That is, if you're planning to divert from the materials that you're already comfortable with. This is materials research. You should ask whether you need any special tools, protective equipment, or training to work with these new materials. Make sure that you're prepared and have good quality materials and equipment. Once you've completed your materials research, you'll want to source your suppliers to try and get the best quality at the best price. You can work out a budget plan for this by using a simple spreadsheet that lists materials, price per unit, quantity required, the supplier, and any notes. You should already have an idea of how many pieces will be included in the exhibition. This will help you estimate your quantities. It is often a good idea to give yourself a 15% buffer on the amounts. This way you have room for mistakes, reducing your risk exposure since you've already factored that into your process. It is super important to keep track of your expenses. These purchases should all be included in your income tax filing. You are making a product or providing a service to sell. All of your inputs, raw materials, any staff, and any external resources you require to make the work contribute to your costs. In business, this is often referred to as the cost of goods sold. This doesn't include indirect costs like a website or overhead costs for renting a studio, etc. Plan out your production time. Work in progress or WIP is the fundamental stage when the making gets done. Typically, this is when you're converting your raw materials like canvas and paint into finished products, also known as paintings. This production phase will be different for everyone. You likely know your process well enough to determine how long it will take you. If you're adding in new materials and processes, do your best to estimate how long it might take. Add some buffer time to provide a little bit of wiggle room, but don't add too much. If you get too comfortable, it might lead to complacency and procrastination. When you factor the press materials into the timeline, be sure to give yourself enough time to source any marketing materials and/or services, including setting up social media pages and scheduling content to build your audience. The content for this will likely emerge from your production phase, i.e., the main images will be based on the work created. The copy will be an extension of that process and experience. As such, this will appear later on in the timeline and will likely overlap with your production phase near to its completion. Your launch, as per the phase gate, otherwise known as go live, or in this instance, the exhibition, will take place near the end of the project. This is likely a hard deadline. To alter this date late in the timeline could be very expensive. Sometimes it is necessary, as in the case of illness or a global pandemic, but should be avoided at all costs. Also, to delay the opening after press packages and invitations have been sent is a PR nightmare and could cost you potential sales. Buyers in this market space are often very discerning, and any lack of faith or confidence in the artist's professionalism can tarnish your reputation. At the final stage here, you might schedule an artist panel to discuss a related topic and host an audience. This could be online, in person, or both. I should add here that you might consider also building an online exhibition to extend your reach globally. Finally, you want to make sure to schedule delivery of the works purchased. You could choose to do this personally, you could farm it out to a professional fine art shipper, or leave it to the buyer to arrange. Some galleries will already have a preparator on staff that could handle this for you. If you are working with a gallerist, they may include this as part of their services for you. Here's a bird's eye view of the whole timeline. We start with the exhibition confirmation and end with sales delivered. However, if you wanted to, you could easily extend this out to give it a more fulsome end-to-end planning. In advance of the exhibition, you might be networking with gallerists to find the right match to your style. You might put together an online portfolio to advertise your work and host some studio visits. After the sales have been delivered, you could send out thank you letters to your guests or follow up with contacts to help expand your network. As with end-to-end supply chain management, you can reach as far upstream or downstream as you like, but you'll just want to be mindful of whether or not it's worth your time. At some point, you may run out of the project space and into what is considered regular daily operations. If you're an artist, designer, or entrepreneur feeling like a fish out of water trying to produce a large project, you don't have to do everything yourself. I'm available for hire. Shoot me an email to see if I can help you expand your vision and plan your way forward. John@marketpowerinnovation.com. Once the boring work of drawing up the timeline for this is over, you can move on to the real fun. Making stuff! Obviously, this will be different for everyone. Furniture designers are different from painters, jewelers are different from industrial designers, illustrators are different from potters, and so on and so on. Keeping sight of your timeline is important, but ultimately, this time is meant for you to really get in there. It's here in the execution phase where we find a significant difference between the business R&D sector and the art and design sector. With R&D, there's usually a laser focus on cost of development, return on investment, and market viability, to say the least. Many managers will oversee the production phase and determine at each new stage whether to keep the project going or to kill it. As I've alluded to elsewhere in this seminar, artists and designers are not as prone to this behavior and will often throw good money after bad and keep trying to save a lost cause instead of stepping back to assess the situation and develop an alternate approach. This is one of the main reasons why I felt compelled to develop this seminar, and I hope that the tools I've outlined here can help you with this in the future. For a comparison, let's take a little detour and look at what they do in the business sector when they try to innovate new products. There are different approaches to innovation. Some companies will opt for a low investment and seek to just optimize their margins. This could be a small design change to reduce materials or slight alterations in marketing to pull away from competitors. I can recall when I first saw a nude pencil, a pencil that wasn't yellow, and I was immediately compelled to buy it. For me, I saw this as a more environmentally conscious product since they weren't using the yellow paint. Whether that was correct or not, it got my attention. For the company, they pulled customers away from the yellow pencil and likely reduced COGS by not using the yellow paint. In other cases, and perhaps the more common strategies these days, is the innovative imitator. This strategy is often seen with vehicles, appliances, education, burgers, pharmaceuticals, etc. When there is an established and obvious need in the market for goods, companies can simply look to existing products and imitate them. The cost of R&D greatly decreases, and the company only needs to make small adjustments to differentiate their product. Since there are less costs incurred, the company can become more aggressive in their pricing strategy. You often see this occur with generic drugs in the pharmaceutical market. Finally, there is the first-to-market strategy. Tesla, Apple, Netflix, and Amazon are good examples of first movers. These companies took the risk, invested in innovation, developed a strong marketing plan, and introduced new products with resounding success. Being a first mover is risky and costly, but if successful, the company can dominate the market while also creating strong brand awareness and loyalty. How does this apply to artists? Think of the wedding or event photographer who is just as good as the next person, but can leverage new technology and reduce costs overall. They are able to optimize their margins and as a result could reinvest those additional profits into gaining more market share. What about the Robert Batemans, Trisha Romances, and Thomas Kincaids of the world? Once the original work is produced, they would work on getting the production costs down to widen those margins for their print sales, reducing costs, and ultimately providing more profit. Anytime there is serial reproduction, there is an opportunity to find efficiencies. In the art world, there is a lot of imitation. Often artists study masterworks to learn how they are made, absorbing the techniques and adapting them to tell their own stories. If you look long enough, you can see old tropes and new trends emerging as if they are somehow coordinated. Some refer to this as the Zeitgeist. Despite this, there are those artists that manage to create something unique, distinct, relevant, and very notable. Whether it be high-key color screen prints of famous stars, a stuffed shark suspended in a tank, or a painting of a colorful swirling night sky, many artists have been able to shock, amaze, hold the attention and awe of their audience. Much like Apple with the iPod, these artists become notorious for their work and rise to a level of recognition unlike any others. They become regarded as masters and revered for centuries. Further to this, businesses will use different strategies depending on how the product and market can be characterized. If the product and market exist and are already established, then the common strategy would be to increase sales to existing clients. If the product is new, but the market already exists, the company can impress customers with new products. And if the product is new and the market is new, there is a really great opportunity
to boldly go where no man has gone before.
This would typically define a new emerging artist or designer, whereas the new product existing market would probably best describe a mid-career artist or designer innovating with their work, although they could be trying to establish new markets in different regions. Established artists commonly would be trying to increase sales and exposure to existing customers in established markets. However, artists can often surprise and amaze. The key buzzword in the innovation zone is return on investment. This is a calculation that basically allows the company to understand the effectiveness of their innovation project. With artists and designers, there is more emphasis on the invention, the passion, the celebration, and the community. Some artists and designers can toil away in their studios, ignoring their expenses, isolating themselves from the world, and investing themselves wholly in their work, all because some force compels them to express themselves through their creations. For better or for worse, it seems to be the way. As for what success looks like, that is a totally different discussion. How an artist or designer measures success can be as varied as their practices. Some value praise, some money, some are seeking an elusive, ideal form that encapsulates their esoteric musings. Some just do it for the love of it. Whatever their desired outcome, I would wager that they all, to varying degrees of awareness, follow some sort of project or innovation system. Likely they've cobbled together a working system without taking full stock of it. This seminar is largely intended to help you gain some insight into your own model and perhaps use the information here to have a more fulsome engagement with your practice. When we think about controlling and monitoring, it sounds very staunch and clinical, but in reality, artists and designers are doing it all of the time. Painters are constantly checking their work to control the outcome and correct mistakes along the way to improve the quality of the work. Designers are often obsessed with accuracy and with using quality materials. If an artist or designer is relying on other agents for their work, they are proofing the prints or making sure the agent is providing the correct results depending on the specs provided. This stage is as much about quality as it is about controlling expenditures. At this stage, changes are more expensive to make and sometimes impossible. Creatives tend to have a lot more flexibility in their projects, especially when they are in the execution phase, where normally there would be a lot of controls to keep the project within a tolerable deviation. Creatives commonly tend to tolerate more deviation and are less risk-averse than most business models. In the process of working out one idea, an artist may have a eureka moment and diverge from their original idea, evolving and extending into a new, unique idea. This can happen many times. The qualifying conditions that are in place for businesses are often based on a prescribed purpose for the research. In business, they would make a business case for the innovation and be required to stay on course to satisfy that business case. For example, a pharmaceutical company may be required to develop an important vaccine. Along the way, they may discover a unique genetic sequence. However, it is unlikely that they would be able to divert from their current course of research to follow that path, and would have to loop around to it at a later time or not. For the maker, depending on their own restrictions, they are often at their own whim as to whether they want to go down a different rabbit hole when one appears. This flexibility is what distinguishes the artist's practice from the research and development department. There is an element of play and discovery that takes a more important role in the creative's process. Without that freedom to explore ideas, materials, and processes, we might not have some of the masterworks that we do today. Ultimately, we are going to close the project. The exhibition or commission or product run has come to an end. We're tying up all of those ends, delivering products to buyers, and taking stock of our results. This is the time to reconcile any outstanding issues and reflect on lessons learned. If you like ticking off boxes, you're going to love this. An important aspect of closing, perhaps the most important, is being able to reflect on what you've been doing, the progress, pitfalls, and promises that you experienced throughout the project. We want to know how you can learn, adapt, prepare for, and/or prevent negative circumstances from occurring in the future. In terms of box ticking, did everything reach the desired state of completion as initially outlined? If not, why? Was that deliverable necessary? Did some deliverables get missed in the planning stage? How did this impact the overall project? What was the final cost of the project? Did expenses increase? Why and how can this be mitigated in the future? In the end, it's important to understand what was done, how it was done, and how it could have been done better. Most important is to make note of the lessons learned and ensure that they are fully embraced and absorbed into your knowledge base. Thank you for joining me today. If you want to know more about the technical world of art, like and subscribe.